Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, a leaked conversation hidden away in the corridors of global power, now dribbled into the public sphere like a poorly kept secret at a dinner party full of spies. Trump and Modi, two leaders not exactly known for subtlety, speaking quietly, even privately, about one man Jaishankar. When we hear that Donald Trump and Narendra Modi have had a private discussion about India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, the first question that ought to pop into our minds isn't, what did they say? But rather, why are they saying it in secret? Why him? Why now? And who else was really in that room? Because politics, as we're told it works, is about transparency, democracy, national interest. All those shiny, palatable words we use to avoid acknowledging the murky underbelly of real power. But when two world leaders, each representing competing versions of populism, nationalism, and post-truth politics, engage in private discourse about a third figure, we're not watching diplomacy unfold. We're watching theatre. And in this theatre, the script is being written behind the curtain, not on the stage. Now, Jaishankar, on paper, is a diplomat, a bureaucrat, a man with a firm handshake and an eloquent grasp of geopolitics. But if Trump and Modi are speaking about him off the record, there's something else going on, something deeper. Because what do powerful men discuss when they're not posturing for cameras? They discuss leverage, threats, opportunities, containment, perhaps even manipulation. So who is Jaishankar in this dynamic? A negotiator, a pawn, or the person quietly redrawing the map while the loud ones are distracted by applause? Think about it, in a world increasingly tilted by ideological polarities, East vs West, democracy vs autocracy, free speech vs manufactured consent, Jaishankar presents an unsettling anomaly. He's too composed to be chaotic, too strategic to be dismissed, and too knowledgeable to be underestimated. He navigates Western corridors of power with the ease of someone who understands both the imperial history and the modern algorithm. And that makes him very inconvenient. Power, real power, doesn't like surprises. It likes predictability. It likes controllable narratives. If Trump and Modi are talking privately about Jaishankar, that tells us he may not be as easily defined or controlled as others in their circles. This isn't about a cabinet minister's press statement or a diplomatic fox pass. This is about someone becoming too effective, too independent, or perhaps just too influential for the comfort of established networks. And here's the real kicker. We don't know whether this conversation was leaked or strategically released. That's the sinister brilliance of modern politics. Was it an accident or an audition? Is the public supposed to hear this? Is it a message to Jaishankar or a message about him to someone else? Perhaps it's a warning. Perhaps it's a signal. When discussions are held behind closed doors, it's not because the content is sensitive. It's because the power dynamics being negotiated are too raw for public consumption. Because real power doesn't shout, it whispers. It whispers in corners, it moves silently through briefcases and encrypted calls. It dresses itself up as diplomacy, but operates like a shadowy cartel, adjusting global balances while we scroll headlines. The curtain isn't just separating the audience from the play, it's separating the world we're allowed to see from the one that actually rules us. Jaishankar doesn't trend on TikTok, he doesn't shout in parliament, he doesn't ride populist waves or appeal to primal instincts. And yet, in a world flooded with loud leaders and theatrical politics, his quiet, precise movements send ripples through the most secure diplomatic waters. He's the kind of figure who seems peripheral until you realise everyone important is watching him very closely. Because behind the scenes of global diplomacy, influence doesn't wear a crown, it wears a suit, speaks in measured tones, and sits at long tables where silence is more powerful than slogans. Jaishankar operates in that realm, a technician of foreign policy, yes, but also a strategist who understands the post-colonial psyche, the multipolar realignment, and the soft power games played in the gaps between empires. And what makes his influence even more potent is its opacity. The public sees foreign ministers as glorified translators or glorified spokespeople. But Jaishankar doesn't just translate India's position to the world. He helps design that position, not just reacting to global currents, but helping to shift them. Look at India's increasingly bold stance in global forums, its defiance of Western pressure over Russia, its expansion into African, Indo-Pacific partnerships. These are not Modi's off. The cuff instincts, these are calculated plays, often engineered with surgical precision by Jaishankar and his inner circle. He speaks the language of empire fluently, not as a servant, but as a rival. With an elite education, time spent in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and Tokyo, Jaishankar understands how global narratives are built, and more importantly, how they're spun. He knows that power today isn't just military or economic, it's ideological. And by refusing to let India be boxed into anyone's camp, he has turned the country into a swing state in the global order, courted by everyone, owned by no one. That precisely is what unnerves many of the traditional power brokers, because Jaishankar isn't playing the old game of East must obey West, nor is he making a populist anti-Western show of defiance. He's doing something far more dangerous to the status quo. He's dismantling the entire framework of how power used to flow and building a new one right under their noses. And yet, despite the subtlety of his movements, his footprint is massive. Western think tanks write papers on his speeches. Diplomats study his phrasing for hidden meaning. Leaders like Trump and Modi, who operate in very different rhetorical registers, feel the need to discuss him in private. Not because he's scandalous or rebellious, but because he's effective in ways they cannot be. He represents competence, calculation, and a kind of intellectual sovereignty that's increasingly rare in a global political landscape driven by clickbait and chaos. His strength isn't loud. It's quiet, unnerving, and persistent, like water slowly reshaping the rocks beneath it. Jaishankar's influence is cumulative, not explosive, but transformative. In an era where information moves faster than thought, where perception outweighs fact, and where media functions less like a mirror and more like a curated feed, the concept of the controlled narrative isn't just a strategy, it's the system itself. And when a leaked private discussion between Trump and Modi emerges, focusing on a figure like Jaishankar, we're not witnessing a simple political gaffe or diplomatic oversight. We're seeing the machinery of narrative control in action, and perhaps more importantly, its momentary slippage. Because let's be honest, leaks like these rarely happen by accident. When world leaders speak privately, it's rarely unscripted, even the silence has purpose. So when information leaks or is leaked, we have to assume it's been passed through filters, scrubbed, curated, and timed. The public doesn't get the raw meat. We get the bones bleached and arranged just right to tell the story we're meant to consume. Jaishankar then becomes more than a name in a transcript. He becomes a symbol, a variable in the narrative being shaped. If Trump and Modi were truly discussing him in secret, it's because there's something about his role that doesn't fit neatly into the global narrative architecture. He isn't loud, populist, or meme worthy. He's methodical, diplomatic, and dangerously well informed. And that makes him uncooperative to the media industrial complex that thrives on outrage, simplicity, and predictable archetypes. Think about how foreign policy is usually framed. There are heroes and villains, allies and threats, the West versus the rest. Jaishankar refuses that binary. He advocates multi-alignment. He dodges ideological entrapment. He critiques the hypocrisy of Western institutions without indulging in theatrics. And this subtle defiance is far more subversive than any flag-waving nationalist chest thumping. The narrative controllers, be they in Washington, New Delhi, or a global boardroom full of unelected technocrats, don't like ambiguity. They like scripts, they like knowing who stands where. Jaishankar's insistence on India's independent foreign policy, even when it contradicts dominant narratives about Ukraine, China, or the so-called liberal order, threatens the illusion of consensus they work so hard to manufacture. And that's the paradox of power in our time. The louder it gets, the more we're told that silence is dangerous, the more hysterical the media cycle becomes, the more valuable, measured, unemotional, and inconvenient truths become. So when someone like Jaishankar speaks in calm, dense paragraphs that resist easy summary, he disrupts the rhythm of a world addicted to dopamine and division. Now, if the leak is real, why did it leak now? If it's staged, who benefits? Does it serve as a warning to Jaishankar to stay in line? Or is it an indirect message to others that his influence is growing and must be watched, maybe even neutralized? Controlled narratives are not about suppressing information. They're about directing attention, constructing consent, and shaping collective memory before it's even formed. And the true power of a narrative isn't just in what it tells you, it's in what it convinces you to ignore for centuries. Global diplomacy has been defined by a lopsided geometry. The West speaks, the East listens. The West writes the script, the East performs its part. The UN charters, Bretton Woods institutions, IMF policies, NATO alignments, all constructed around the idea that Western modes of governance, economics, and morality are the default. But what happens when that framework starts to fracture, not through open revolt, but through subtle diplomatic recalibration? This is what makes the alleged private discussion between Trump and Modi about Jaishankar so telling. It's not just gossip about a cabinet minister. It's a symptom of a shifting fault line. Because Jaishankar doesn't just represent India's external affairs, he symbolises a new diplomatic attitude emerging from the East, one that neither begs for Western approval nor defines itself in opposition to it. The traditional East-West dynamic was based on assumed superiority. Western nations, particularly the United States and its Atlantic allies, viewed themselves as arbiters of truth, peace, and human rights, while the East was expected to assimilate or be excluded. Even the so-called rise of Asia was always narrated from a Western vantage point. Look how well they're doing, they're finally catching up. But Jaishankar doesn't speak in the language of catching up. He speaks in the language of choice, of sovereignty, of multipolarity, and that's what unnerves the Western diplomatic machine, because he doesn't come to the table seeking validation. He challenges the structure of the table itself, questioning why some chairs are taller, why some voices are louder, and why some histories are remembered while others are erased. In contrast, Trump's version of diplomacy, transactional, unpredictable, rooted in bravado, reflects a West struggling to maintain its narrative dominance. Modi, on the other hand, represents a resurgent nationalism fused with a desire to assert India's ancient civilizational weight. When these two men speak about Jaishankar in private, it's as if they're acknowledging the presence of a figure who defies the tropes they're comfortable with. Not a populist, not a firebrand, not a proxy, but a calculated operator navigating between worlds. This East vs West diplomacy isn't a new Cold War. It's something messier, more fluid, and far more psychological. It's not fought with tanks and treaties, but with data, trade routes, cultural narratives, and rhetorical framing. And in that theatre, figures like Jaishankar pose a dilemma. They don't play the villain, nor do they play the protégé. They rewrite the character entirely. It's this refusal to fit into the script, this assertion of a different tempo, a different set of priorities, that destabilises the old diplomatic choreography. The West still expects moral lectures to be followed by compliance. But now the East responds not with deference, but with counter questions, historical memory, and an increasing ability to walk away from the table entirely. The diplomatic conversation is no longer one directional, and more importantly, it's no longer conducted on exclusively Western terms. Modern politics isn't governance. It's theatre with a state budget, a rotating cast of performers, some good, some appallingly bad, all playing roles in a production where the plot never really changes, but the costumes do. Speeches become monologues, press conferences are rehearsed scenes, and debates are little more than scripted sparring sessions designed not to illuminate truth, but to reinforce carefully curated personas. In this grand production, the public is the audience, the media is the lighting crew, and policy, that's backstage buried under cue cards and contract clauses. So when we hear that Donald Trump and Narendra Modi had a private discussion about Jaishankar, it's not just a moment of geopolitical curiosity. It's a crack in the stage wall, a brief glimpse into the director's notes rather than the actor's lines. Trump, the quintessential showman, the chaotic anti-script hero of American politics. Modi, the stoic strongman, crafting nationalist mythologies with cinematic flair. Together, they've mastered the art of political theatre. So, if they're speaking privately about Jaishankar, it suggests that he's not part of the show. Or worse, he's the one rewriting the script behind the scenes. Because here's the thing about Jaishankar, he doesn't play his part like the rest of them. He doesn't gesture wildly or weaponize slogans. He doesn't craft narratives to score points with the crowd. Instead, he operates with surgical precision, issuing statements that dismantle decades of Western double standards with a few quiet sentences. It's not flashy, it's not dramatic. And that makes it all the more dangerous in a world where politics has become spectacle over substance. Theatrical politics thrives on binary conflict. Good guys vs bad guys, West vs East, liberal vs authoritarian. But Jaishankar doesn't fit neatly into any of those roles. He isn't romanticized as a freedom fighter, nor demonized as a despot. He's something else, A calm disruptor, an intellectual technocrat with the audacity to demand balance in a world that prefers winners and losers. That's not a role written into the existing script. And when someone goes off script in politics, they become unpredictable, and unpredictability is the greatest threat to a performance built on control. Trump's politics was reality TV without the commercial break. Modi's is myth-making infused with cultural nationalism. Jaishankar's is none of that. It's technical, historical, and unyielding. He doesn't appeal to base instincts. He appeals to facts, memory, and dignity. In a system designed to amplify outrage and simplify truth, this methodical approach is alien, and alien things in political theatre are either absorbed, attacked, or silenced. This is why the private conversation becomes so fascinating. It's not just who's talking, it's who they're talking about. When two leading actors step out of the spotlight to discuss a man who doesn't even claim the stage, it tells you the real drama isn't happening in front of the audience. The performance distracts the masses, but the direction, the true negotiations, the power struggles, those happen off stage, under dim lights, between lines not meant to be overheard. We live in a time where the surface is everything. Flashy headlines, trending hashtags, viral clips, all forming a continuous loop of distraction, endlessly scrolling across our collective attention span. Meanwhile, behind this digital circus, behind the smug political sound bites and feel good press releases, something far more consequential is always happening. Private deals, discreet meetings, carefully worded communiques exchanged in hushed tones away from the cameras. The political drama we consume is often just the sugar coating around the bitter truth that power is rarely exercised in the open. This is the context in which a leaked private discussion between Donald Trump and Narendra Modi about Jaishankar must be viewed, not as a random anomaly or amusing diplomatic footnote, but as a brief and unintentional misfire in a system designed to hide the real workings of global politics behind a wall of spectacle. Because the public is not meant to know who's being discussed behind closed doors. They are meant to be too busy debating which party is more corrupt, which leader is more charismatic, or which trending controversy deserves their latest moral outrage. The political class across nations and ideologies has mastered the art of manufacturing conflict for public consumption, cultural wars, symbolic protests, identity politics, celebrity endorsements of political causes, all wrapped up in a digestible format suitable for the 24-hour news cycle. Meanwhile, the real deals, the military agreements, the back-channel trade negotiations, the geopolitical alignments that shift power blocks and impact millions are being hashed out in private rooms by individuals who never appear on your screen. Jaishankar represents something that doesn't fit into that neatly packaged system of distraction. He's not flamboyant enough to be viral, not polarizing enough to be meme material, and not ideologically extreme enough to stir protest marches. He doesn't operate through public posturing. He operates through diplomatic networks, through long-term strategy, through uncomfortable truths delivered with calm authority. And that makes him dangerous, not to the public, but to those who rely on managing the public narrative while securing private gains. So when Trump and Modi speak about him behind closed doors, the question isn't just what they said. The question is what sort of deal-making required him to be part of the conversation. Was it a warning? Was it concern about his growing influence in shaping India's independent foreign policy? Was it a reflection of shifting alliances and the discomfort of no longer being able to predict or control India's position on the world stage? Because the public isn't supposed to ask those questions. They're supposed to be too busy laughing at Trump's latest outburst or critiquing Modi's social media campaign. Meanwhile, relationships are being forged, concessions are being negotiated, and frameworks of power are being reshuffled, far from the spectacle behind bulletproof doors, where no one's live streaming and everyone understands the stakes. In a world where politics is performance and truth is managed like a PR campaign. The private conversation between Trump and Modi about Jaishankar reveals far more than intended. It exposes the tension between spectacle and strategy, between the loud theatrics of populism and the quiet influence of real diplomacy. Jaishankar, unassuming yet potent, represents a shift, a challenge to old narratives, old hierarchies, and old assumptions about who controls global power. While the world watches the stage, figures like him reshape the script. And if they're whispering about him in private, it's because he's changing something they can't afford to ignore.